The Ktunaxa, also known as Kootenai, Kootenay and Kootenai, are an indigenous people of North America, who historically occupied extensive territories in the Pacific Northwest, present-day United States and British Columbia, Canada. 4 bands formed the Ktunaxa Nation and the kindred Shuswap Indian Band in British Columbia. The Kutenai were allied with the Shuswap historically and through intermarriage. In the United States, the people have formed 3 federally recognized tribes. In present-day Montana, the Kootenai, part of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes of the Flathead Nation, together with the Bitterroot Salish and Upper Pendera. They have federal recognition as the Kootenai tribe of Idaho in Idaho. Small populations of Kootenai living in Washington are part of the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation. The Kootenai language is an isolate, unrelated to the languages of neighboring peoples. Communities. There are 4 bands in southeastern British Columbia, 1 band in northern Idaho, 1 band in northwestern Montana, and small populations in Washington who are allied with other peoples as a tribe. Canada, British Columbia Ktunaxa Nation Council, Lower Kootenay First Nation, St. Mary's First Nation No. 5, Acidors Ranch No. 4, Kootenai No. 1, St. Mary's No. 1 at California. 79 square kilometers, population 357. Tobacco Plains First Nation, on the east shore of the Lake Kootenai below the mouth of Elk River, California, 15 kilometers north of the British Columbia-Montana border. Reserves. St. Mary's No. 1 at Tobacco Plains No. 2, California. 44 square kilometers, population 165. Ktunaxa First Nation, Shuswap Nation Tribal Council, one of the 2 tribal councils of the Sequepet Shuswap Indian Band, are formerly members of the Ktunaxa Nation Council. United States, Idaho Kootenai Tribe of Idaho. They are one of 5 federally recognized tribes in Idaho. United States, Montana Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes of the Flathead Nation and the Upper Pendera. The Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes of the Flathead Nation, California. 5.058 square kilometers, population about 6.800 live on the reservation, California. 3.700 outside near the reservation. United States, Washington Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation. History. The Ktunaxa people today live in southeastern British Columbia, Washington State, Idaho, and Montana. In Montana they are known as Ktunaxa. Ktunaxa is the autonym of what the people call themselves. It is pronounced Tanaha, with a barely perceptible K sound at the beginning of the word. British and American traders adopted and anglicized a term used by the Blackfoot in the language, thus referring to this people as Kootenay or Kootenai. In some of the tribal organizations and activities, the Ktunaxa identify as Kootenay, or as spelled in Montana, Kutenai. The people are culturally distinguished between the Upper Kootenai, those bands based around Invermere and Windermere, British Columbia, and Lower Kootenai, those based around Creston, Grassmere, and Cranbrook, British Columbia, Bonners Ferry, Idaho, and the Ktunaxa of Elmo, Montana. This history focuses on the Creston band of the Lower Kootenai, who call themselves the Yukon and Ukiy Ktunaxa, or the Marshall Water people of the Ktunaxa. Origins. Scholars have numerous ideas about the origins of the Ktunaxa. One theory is that they originally lived on the prairies, and were driven across the Rockies by the competing Blackfoot people by famine and disease. Some Upper Kootenai participated in a plains native lifestyle for part of the year, crossing the Rockies to the east for the bison hunt. They were relatively well known to the Blackfoot. and sometimes the relations with them were in the form of violent confrontation over the food competition. Some Ktunaxa remained on a return to the prairies year-round. They had a settlement near Fort Macleod, Alberta. This group of Ktunaxa suffered high mortality rates, partly because of the depredations of the Blackfoot, and partly because of smallpox epidemics. With numbers sharply reduced, these Plains Ktunaxa returned to the Kootenai region of British Columbia. Some of the Ktunaxa say that their ancestors came originally from the Great Lakes region of Michigan. To date, scholars have not found evidence to support this account, neither in the archaeological nor in the historical record. The Ktunaxa territory in British Columbia has archaeological sites with some of the oldest man-made artifacts in Canada. It has not been proven that these artifacts were left by ancestors of the Ktunaxa or by another, possibly Salishan, group. Human occupation of the Kootenai Rockies by 11,500 before the present has been demonstrated by dated sites with evidence of quarrying and flint knapping, especially of quartzite and tourmaline. This oldest assemblage of artifacts is known as the Goat Fell Complex, named after the Goat Fell region about 40 kilometers east of Creston, British Columbia on Highway 3. These artifacts have been found at quarries in Goat Fell, Harvey Mountain, Idaho, Negro Lake and Keiko Lake, North Star Mountain just west of Creston on Highway 3, and at Blue Ridge. All these sites are within 50 kilometers of Creston, with the exception of Blue Ridge, which is near the village of Caslow, quite a distance north on the west side of Kootenai Lake. Archaeologist Drive. Wayne Choquette believes that the artifacts represented in the Goat Fell complex at 11,500 BP up to the artifacts of the early historical period show that there has been no break in the archaeological record. In addition, it appears that the technology was local. No evidence supports conjecture that the region's first inhabitants emigrated from this area, nor that they were replaced or succeeded by different people. Choquette concludes that the Ktunaxa today are the descendants of those first people to inhabit the land. Other scholars suggest that the Ktunaxa moved to the British Columbia region in the early half of the 18th century, having been harassed and pushed from east of the Rockies by the Blackfoot. The language is isolated from that of Salish tribes, and the traditional dress, many of the customs and the traditional religion have more in common with Plains peoples than with the coastal Salish. The Goat Fell assemblage of artifacts suggests that prior to 11,500 BP, the people who came to inhabit the Kootenays may have lived in what is now the southwestern United States, during a period when British Columbia was beneath the Cordilleran ice sheet of the last ice age. The Goat Fell complex, and specifically the techniques of manufacture of the tools and points, are part of a tradition of knapping that existed in the North American Great Basin and the intermontane west of the continent in the late Pleistocene. The prevailing theory is that as the glaciers retreated, people moved northward, following the revival of the flora and fauna to the north. Citation required. For the time of the first Ktunaxa settlement in the Kootenays, until the historical period beginning in the late 18th century, there is little known of the people's social, political, and intellectual development. Stone tool technologies changed and became more complex and differentiated. They were probably big game hunters in their earliest prehistoric phase. The Ktunaxa were first noted in the historical record when mentioned on Alexander Mackenzie's map, circa 1793. As temperatures continued to warm, the glacial lakes drained and fish found habitat in the warmer waters. The lower Kootenai across the Pacific Northwest made fishing a fundamental part of the diet and culture, while maintaining the old traditions of game hunting. Early history, anthropological and ethnographic interest in the Ktunaxa were recorded from the mid-19th century. What these European and North American scholars observed has to be viewed with a critical eye, since they did not have the theoretical sophistication we expect of anthropologists today, and they imputed a great deal of their own cultural values into what they were able to witness among the Ktunaxa. They remain, however, the most detailed descriptions of Ktunaxa lifestyles at a time when Aboriginal lifeways all over the world were dramatically changing in the face of settlement by Europeans and European Americans. Citation needed. The earliest ethnographies detail Ktunaxa culture around the turn of the 20th century. Europeans observed the Ktunaxa enjoying a stable economic life and rich social life, based on a detailed ritual calendar. Their economic life focused on fishing, using fish traps and hooks, and traveling on the waterways in the sturgeon-nose canoe. There were also seasonal and sometimes ritual hunts for bear, deer, caribou, gophers, geese, and the many other fowl in Lower Kootenai country, is mentioned above. The Upper Kootenai often crossed the Rockies to participate in the bison hunt. The Lower Kootenai, however, did not participate in communal bison hunts. These were not important to their economy or culture. Citation required. The Ktunaxa conducted vision quests, particularly by young men in a passage to adulthood. They used tobacco ritually. They practiced a sun dance and grizzly bear dance, a midwinter festival, a blue jay dance, and other social and ceremonial activities. Citation required. There were different societies or lodges that people belonged to, such as the Crazy Dog Society, the Crazy Owl Society, and the Shaman's Society. These groups took on certain responsibilities in Ktunaxa society, and membership in a lodge came with obligations in battle, hunting, and community service. The Ktunaxa and the neighbors, the Cynics, both used the sturgeon-nose canoe. This watercraft was first described in 1899 as having some similarity to canoes used in the Amur region of Asia. At the time, some scholars believed in a theory of dispersal, concluding that similarities of artifacts or symbols among cultures represented that a superior culture or had transmitted its elements to another culture. Since then, however, most scholars have concluded that many such innovations arose independently in origin among different cultures. Harry Holbertoni High, the first to write an extensive ethnography of the Ktunaxa, records a detailed description of the harvesting of bark to make this canoe. A tree growing rather high in the mountains is sought. Finding one of the desired size and quality, a man climbed it to the proper height and cut a ring around the bark with his elkhorn chisel or flint knife. In the meantime, a helper cut out another ring at the base of the tree. This done, an incision was made down the length of the trunk connecting the two rings. This cut had to be as straight and accurate as possible. A stick of about 2 inches in diameter was used carefully to pry the bark from the tree. The bark was wrapped up so that it would not dry out on the way to camp. The inside, or tree side of the bark sheet became the outside of the canoe, while the outside surface became the inside of the boat. The bark was considered ready for immediate use. There was no scraping or seasoning, nor was it decorated in any way. Christian missionaries traveled to the Ktunaxa territories and worked to convert the peoples, keeping extensive written records of the process and of their observations of the culture. There is more information about this process than about other aspects of Ktunaxa history at the turn of the 20th century. The Ktunaxa had been exposed to Christianity as early as the 18th century, when a Lower Kootenai prophet from Flathead Lake in Idaho by the name of Shining Shirt spread news of the coming of the Black Rovers. Ktunaxa people also encountered Christian Iroquois sent west by the Hudson's Bay Company. By the 1830s, the Ktunaxa had begun to adopt certain Christian elements in a syncretic blend of ceremonies. They were influenced less by European missionaries missionaries and through the contact with Christian natives from other parts of Canada and the United States. Father Pierre-Jean Dusmet in 1845–6 was the first missionary to tour the region, with a view to establishing missions to minister to native peoples and assessing the success and needs of those already established. Citation required. It had been a priority of the Jesuits to minister to these newly discovered non-Christians in the New World. This is a phenomenon that had been ongoing in eastern North America for 200 years, but the Ktunaxa were not the objects of the Church's attentions until the mid-late 19th century. A Jesuit by the name of Filippo Canestrelli lived among the Ktunaxa people of Montana in the 1880s and 90s, and wrote a much-celebrated grammar of the language, published in 1896. The first missionary to take up a permanent post in the Yukon and Ukiah Territory, i.e., the Creston Band of Lower Kootenai, was Father Nicholas Kokola, who arrived in the Creston area in 1880. It is from his memoirs, corroborated by newspaper reports and Ktunaxa oral histories, that the early 20th century history of the Ktunaxa is constructed. In the first stages of Ktunaxa European contact, mainly the result of a gold rush that began in earnest in 1863 with the discovery of gold in Wild Horse Creek, the Ktunaxa were little interested in European-driven economic activities. There was an attempt to recruit them to trap in support of the fur trade, but few Lower Kootenai found this worthwhile. The Lower Kootenai region is, as mentioned above, remarkably rich in fish, birds, and large game, and so the economic life of the Yukon and Ukiah was notably secure, and thus resistant to new unfamiliar economic activities. Slowly though, the Yukon and Ukiah began participating in European-driven industries. They served as hunters and guides for the miners at the Bluebell Silver Lead mine at Randall. The richest gold mine ever discovered in the Kootenays was discovered by a Ktunaxa man named Pierre, and staked by him and Father Kokola in 1893. Citation required 20th century. While there was sometimes conflict between the Yukon and Ukiah and the local settler community at Creston, the relations are characterized much more by peaceful coexistence, and never reached the pitch of the relations between the surrounding European society and the Lower Kootenai in Bonners Ferry, Idaho, who officially declared war against the U.S. government in 1974 over land claims. The conflict that there was between the Creston Band and the local settlers usually had its origin in land use. By the turn of the 20th century, some Yukon and Ukiah were engaged in agricultural activities introduced to them by the European settlers, but their approach to the land was different. An example of the type of conflict which would come up between European settlers and native farmers is shown by a newspaper article in the Creston Review dated Friday, August 9, 1912, a dispute over the rights to cut hay on the flatlands between the Indians and the white men, which might have resulted in bloodshed, was settled Wednesday by W. F. Tietzel, government agent of Nelson, who told both Indians and whites that if violence is done, no one would be allowed to cut hay on government land. The principal trouble this year occurred when some Indians threatened Frank Lewis and drove him from the hay he had already cut. The Indians claim they have cut land at this particular place for years, while the old-time ranchers say that hay has never before been cut there. Mr. Lewis complained to Policeman Gunn, who, as the definite boundary of the Indian reservation is not known, was at a loss what to do because no violence was committed whereby he could act. Mr. Tietzel arrived from Nelson Wednesday and in conference with Chief Alexander, got him to promise to see that Mr. Lewis got his hay, and warned him to keep the Indians from violence under penalty of losing the right of cutting hay on the flats. This warning he also gave to the white men. This is not the only one of the cases occurring this year. One farmer whose place is located near the reservation has been continually bothered by the Indians cutting his fences and turning their cattle in to graze on his property. Yet, in the very same year we hear this report in the Creston Review, June 21, 1912, says everything is in good condition and the majority of the Indians are at work picking berries for the ranchers who find the help useful and profitable. These examples illustrate the dynamic of relations between two peoples, the Ktunaxa, whose lands have been vastly reduced by the introduction of a reserve system, and the European settlers who are constantly looking to expand their industries and their access to the land. During the 20th century, the Yukon and Ukiy gradually became involved in all the industries of the Creston Valley: agriculture, forestry, mining, and later healthcare, education, and tourism. This process of integration separated the Yukon and Ukiy from the traditional lifeways, yet they have remained a very successful and self-confident community. They also gradually gained more control over their own affairs, with less involvement from the Department of Indian or Aboriginal Affairs and more self-government. Like most tribes in British Columbia, the Yukon and Ukiy did not have a treaty defining the rights regarding the territory, but a careful and more or less cooperative treaty negotiation process with the Government of Canada has been ongoing for decades. The Creston Band of the Ktunaxa today boasts 113 individuals living on the reserve, and many others living off reserve and working in various industries in Canada and the United States. Through long years of integration, the Ktunaxa feel that they have lost some traditions that are very important to them. They are taking bold steps to rectify this situation. There are 10 living fluent speakers of Ktunaxa both in the U.S. and Canada. The Yukon and Ukiy have developed curriculum for grades 4 to 6, and have been teaching it for 4 years. They are currently involved in designing curriculum for grades 7 to 12, and this requires meeting special BC curriculum guidelines. Concurrent with this, there is a vibrant effort to record oral stories and myths, as well as to videotape and describe the making of the traditional crafts and technologies. Kootenay Nation War. On September 20, 1974, the Kootenai tribe headed by chairwoman Amy Trice declared war on the United States government. The first act was to post tribal members on each end of the highway that runs through the town. They asked motorists to pay a toll to drive through the land that had been the tribe's Aboriginal land. The money would be used to house and care for elderly tribal members. Most tribes in the United States are forbidden to declare war on the U.S. government because of treaties, but the Kootenai tribe never signed a treaty. The dispute resulted in the concession by the United States government on a land grant of 12.5 acres that would become what is now the Kootenai Reservation. In 1976, the tribe issued Kootenay Nation War bonds that sold at $1 each. The bonds were dated the 20th of September 1974 and contained a brief declaration of war on the United States. These war bonds were signed by Amelia Custak Trice, tribal chairwoman, and Douglas James Wheaton, Sr., tribal representative. The bonds themselves were printed on heavy paper stock and were designed and signed by the Western artist Emily Touraine.